On a cold autumn night, a homeless teenage girl walked into a quiet diner with just $4.73 in her pocket. That money was supposed to be all the food she would have for the next 2 days. But minutes later, she used it to buy dinner for two strangers instead of herself. People inside the diner thought it was simply a small, kind gesture. Something sweet, something forgettable. But what no one realized in that moment was that the elderly couple sitting across the room were not ordinary strangers. They were billionaires. And the quiet decision that girl made that night would trigger a chain of events that no one in that diner would ever forget. Because before the night was over, lives would change, secrets would be revealed, and the girl who believed she had lost everything was about to discover that one act of kindness can rewrite an entire future. But to understand how it all happened, we need to start with the girl who had almost nothing. Her name was Lena Carter, and her story begins long before that night on Maple Street. Lena Carter was 16 years old, but life had already forced her to grow up far faster than most people ever should. Just a year earlier, Lena had been living in a small apartment with her mother on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the walls peeled in places, and the heater made strange rattling noises during winter. But to Lena, it had been home. Her mother, Maria, worked 2 jobs cleaning offices during the day and helping at a bakery before sunrise. She was always tired, but no matter how long her day had been, she always greeted Lena with the same warm smile. And every night before bed, she would say the same thing. Lena, no matter how hard life gets, remember one thing. Lena would always repeat it with her. Kindness costs nothing. Maria believed that more than anything in the world, even when they barely had enough groceries, even when the electricity was late, even when life felt unfair, her mother would still find ways to help others. Sometimes she'd cook extra soup for an elderly neighbor. Other times, she'd leave food for stray animals near the alley. And whenever Lena asked why she kept giving when they had so little, Maria would simply smile and say, "Because kindness has a way of finding its way back to you." But life doesn't always move in fair directions. And one rainy evening, everything changed. Maria became sick. At first, it seemed like nothing serious. Just fatigue, a cough, something that would pass. But it didn't. Weeks turned into hospital visits. Hospital visits turned into medical bills. And eventually, Lena found herself sitting beside a hospital bed, holding her mother's hand while machines hummed quietly in the background. Maria looked weaker than Lena had ever seen. But even then, she still smiled. "Promise me something," her mother whispered. Lena squeezed her hand tightly. "Anything." Maria looked at her with gentle eyes. "Promise me you'll keep being kind, no matter what life throws at you." Tears filled Lena's eyes. "I promise." Those were the last words her mother ever asked of her. Within months, the medical bills and unpaid rent forced Lena out of the apartment. With no other family nearby, she ended up staying at a small community shelter just a few blocks from Maple Street. It wasn't easy. The shelter was crowded, noisy, and sometimes uncertain. But Lena never let bitterness take root in her heart. Instead, she held tightly to the one thing her mother had left her: kindness, even if it was the only thing she had. Every morning, Lena helped clean the shelter before school. After classes, she volunteered at a local library organizing books. And whenever she had spare change, she would buy bread to share with other kids at the shelter. Some people couldn't understand her. One afternoon, another girl at the shelter shook her head. "You're too nice," she said. "The world doesn't work like that." Lena just smiled softly. "Maybe not," she said, "but it should." Still, there were nights when things felt overwhelming. Like the chilly autumn evening when Lena walked slowly down Maple Street with her hands tucked inside the sleeves of her worn sweater. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant chimney smoke. Streetlights flickered gently above the quiet road, and Lena's stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since lunchtime at school. Inside her pocket, she held the small pile of coins she had saved. $4.73. She had counted it 3 times already. Just enough for a bowl of soup and bread at the diner. Nothing more. But it would have to last. Because the shelter kitchen would be closed tomorrow, and Lena wouldn't have more money until next week. Still, when she reached the corner of Maple Street, the familiar glow of the small diner windows warmed the dark sidewalk. The Maple Street diner had been there for decades. Old neon lights buzzed softly above the entrance. Inside, the smell of fresh soup, grilled cheese, and coffee filled the air. It was the kind of place where strangers nodded politely at each other. The kind of place where waitresses remembered your name. Lena hesitated for a moment outside the door. Her stomach rumbled again. Finally, she pushed the door open. A small bell chimed overhead. The warmth inside wrapped around her instantly. A waitress named Carla noticed her and smiled. "Well, hey there, Lena," she said kindly. Lena came in occasionally when she had spare change. "Hi, Miss Carla. Cold out there tonight?" "A little." Carla handed her a menu, though they both knew Lena already knew the cheapest items by heart. "Sit wherever you like, sweetheart." The diner was unusually quiet. Only 3 tables were occupied. An old truck driver sipping coffee, a young couple whispering over milkshakes, and across the room, an elderly couple sitting by the window. They looked elegant but tired. The man wore a gray coat neatly folded beside him. The woman had silver hair and a soft blue scarf around her shoulders. Lena didn't think much of it at first. She slid into a corner booth and carefully counted her coins again under the table. "For 73. Just enough." Carla returned. "What can I get you tonight?" Lena smiled politely. "Just the vegetable soup and bread, please." "You got it." As Lena waited, she glanced around the quiet diner. That's when she noticed something strange about the elderly couple. They were studying the menu very carefully, whispering back and forth. The man opened his wallet, looked inside, and frowned slightly. The woman gently placed her hand over his. "It's all right," she said softly. "We can share something small." Lena's chest tightened. She knew that look. The look of people trying to stretch their last few dollars. She had seen it countless times at the shelter. The man sighed quietly. "Maybe just coffee," he said. "No," the woman replied kindly. "You need something warm." Lena looked down at her coins again. "For $1.73. Her stomach growled. The soup arrived moments later, steaming gently in front of her. The smell was incredible. She lifted the spoon slowly. But before taking the first bite, she glanced at the couple again. They were still discussing the menu, still hesitating, still trying to decide what they could afford. Lena felt a familiar memory echo in her mind. Her mother's voice. Kindness costs nothing. She stared at the soup, then at the coins, then back at the couple. Inside her chest, 2 thoughts battled each other. If she paid for their food, she might not eat again tomorrow. But if she didn't, those 2 strangers might leave hungry tonight. Lena closed her eyes for a moment and whispered quietly to herself. Kindness costs nothing. When Carla returned to check on her, Lena leaned forward slightly. Her voice was soft. "Miss Carla, could I ask you something?" The waitress nodded. "Of course." Lena glanced toward the elderly couple. "Could you add their meal to my bill?" Carla blinked in surprise. "Their meal?" Lena nodded. "Please. But don't tell them it was me." Carla looked at the small pile of coins sitting beside Lena's bowl and suddenly realized something that made her chest tighten. "That's all the money you have, isn't it?" Lena smiled gently. "It's okay." Carla hesitated, but then she nodded slowly. "All right." And as she walked toward the elderly couple's table, no one inside that diner had the slightest idea that the quiet girl in the corner had just made a decision that would change her life forever. But what happened next left everyone in that room completely speechless. Carla walked slowly toward the elderly couple's table, still glancing back at Lena in disbelief. The girl had already started eating her soup, quietly, like nothing unusual had just happened. Carla had worked at the Maple Street Diner for nearly 15 years. She had seen all kinds of people come through those doors: truck drivers, families, tourists, teenagers on first dates. But she had never seen someone with so little offer so much. She reached the couple's table and smiled politely. "Have you 2 decided what you'd like tonight?" The man adjusted his glasses and looked at the menu again. "We were thinking maybe the chicken soup and perhaps 1 sandwich to share." The woman gave an apologetic smile. "Just something small." Carla paused for a moment. Then she said something that made both of them look up in confusion. "Well, actually, your dinner has already been taken care of." The man blinked. "I'm sorry. It's been paid for." The woman looked around the diner. "That must be some kind of mistake." Carla shook her head gently. "No mistake." The man leaned back in his chair. "Someone here paid for our meal?" Carla nodded. "Yes." The couple exchanged a puzzled look. The woman whispered quietly, "But we don't know anyone here." Carla simply smiled. "Well, someone wanted to do something nice tonight." The man slowly scanned the room. The truck driver at the counter looked confused. The young couple was busy laughing over their milkshakes. And then, his eyes landed on the corner booth. Lena. She was carefully tearing a piece of bread dipping it into her soup, trying very hard not to look in their direction. The elderly woman followed her husband's gaze, and the moment she saw Lena, something in her expression softened. "Daniel," she whispered. I think it was her. Daniel Hayes studied the girl quietly. Her sweater was thin. Her backpack rested beside her feet, and the small stack of coins on the table beside her empty bowl told him something important, something that made his chest tighten. "She paid for us with that?" Eleanor nodded slowly. Carla spoke softly. "She asked me not to say anything." For a moment, the couple didn't say a word. The diner remained quiet. Soft music played from an old radio behind the counter. Finally, Eleanor pushed her chair back gently. "I'd like to thank her." Carla smiled. "You can try." The elderly woman walked across the diner slowly. Lena noticed the movement and immediately looked down at her soup. Maybe if she didn't make eye contact, maybe they wouldn't realize it was her. But a gentle voice spoke beside her table. "Excuse me, dear." Lena looked up. The elderly woman stood there with warm eyes and a soft smile. "Was it you who paid for our dinner?" Lena's cheeks turned pink instantly. "Oh, it was nothing." Daniel had joined them now. He studied her carefully. "You didn't have to do that." Lena shrugged slightly. "You looked like you needed it." Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion. "But what about you?" Lena glanced at her nearly empty bowl. "I'm okay." Daniel looked down at the coins still sitting on the table. $4.73. And suddenly he understood something important. This girl hadn't given from abundance. She had given from everything she had. "May we sit with you?" Eleanor asked gently. Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." They slid into the booth across from her. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Eleanor asked softly, "What's your name?" "Lena." "I'm Eleanor," she said kindly. "And this is my husband, Daniel." Lena smiled politely. "Nice to meet you." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Lena, why would you do something like that for complete strangers?" Lena thought about it for a moment. Then she answered honestly. "My mom used to say kindness costs nothing." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "That's a beautiful thing to believe." Lena nodded. She said, "Even when life gets really hard, you should still try to help people." Daniel studied her face. "And life has been hard for you." Lena hesitated. But before she could answer, the bell above the diner door suddenly rang. And what happened next made the entire room turn their heads. Two men in dark coats stepped into the diner. They weren't dressed like ordinary customers. Their eyes scanned the room carefully. One of them spoke quietly into a small radio clipped to his jacket. Carla behind the counter immediately looked confused. The truck driver turned around on his stool, and Daniel Hayes sighed softly. "Well," he muttered, "I suppose they finally caught up with us." Lena looked puzzled. "Who?" Before Daniel could answer, the two men approached their table quickly. "Mr. Hayes," one of them said firmly, "we've been looking everywhere for you." The entire diner went silent. Lena blinked. "Mr. Hayes?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I told you we didn't need security tonight." "With respect, sir," the man replied, "the board strongly disagrees." Carla nearly dropped a glass behind the counter. "Wait, Hayes." The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. The other customers began whispering quietly. Eleanor smiled gently at Lena. "It seems our little evening adventure has been discovered." Lena looked confused. "What adventure?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, Eleanor and I sometimes like to travel without attention." "Why?" "To remind ourselves what the real world feels like." Lena tilted her head. "I don't understand." One of the security men finally spoke. "Sir, the car is waiting." Daniel raised a hand. "One moment." He turned back to Lena. "You said you're 16? "Yes." "And you're here alone tonight?" Lena nodded. "I live nearby." Eleanor gently studied the girl's worn backpack. "Do you live with your parents?" For a brief moment, Lena's smile faded. "My mom passed away last year." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Lena said softly. "I stay at the community shelter now." Those words landed heavily in the quiet diner. Even the security men exchanged surprised looks. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. "A shelter?" Lena nodded. "But it's not so bad." Daniel looked at the coins again, then at the empty soup bowl, then at the girl who had given away the only money she had. And something in his expression changed. Something serious. Because in that moment, Daniel Hayes realized something he had not expected to find that evening. Integrity. Kindness. Character. The kind of character that money could never buy. And what he said next would leave everyone in the diner stunned. Daniel stood up slowly. "Lena, do you know who I am?" She shook her head. No. Carlo whispered behind the counter. Oh my goodness. The truck driver leaned closer to hear. Daniel looked at Lena kindly. My name is Daniel Hayes. I run a company called Hayes Global Industries. Lena shrugged slightly. I've never heard of it. The entire diner gasped quietly. One of the security guards almost laughed. Daniel smiled. That's probably a good thing. But Carla finally spoke up. Sweetheart, Hayes Global is worth billions. Lena blinked. What? Eleanor chuckled softly. Yes, billions. Lena stared at them in disbelief. You're billionaires? Daniel nodded calmly. And suddenly Lena's brain began replaying everything that had just happened. The soup, the coins, the dinner she paid for. Her eyes widened. Oh no. Daniel tilted his head. Oh no. Lena buried her face in her hands. I just spent my last $4 buying dinner for billionaires. For a moment, the entire diner was silent. And then Daniel Hayes burst out laughing. A deep, genuine laugh that filled the room. Eleanor laughed too. Even Carla couldn't help smiling. But Daniel's laughter slowly faded into something thoughtful. Because Lena had no idea that the simple thing she had done tonight was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. Daniel leaned forward and said quietly, Lena, how would you feel about coming to work for me someday? Lena blinked in confusion. Work? Daniel smiled. No, that's not quite the right word. Eleanor squeezed Lena's hand gently. Maybe opportunity is a better one. And what they offered her next would leave the entire diner speechless. But Lena had no idea yet that the biggest surprise of the night was still coming. For a moment, Lena simply stared at them. The idea that the quiet, elderly couple sitting across from her were billionaires still hadn't fully sunk in. Her brain felt like it was trying to catch up to something impossible. Just minutes ago, she thought they were struggling to afford dinner. Now she was being told they owned a business empire. Daniel Hayes watched her carefully. He had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and met presidents and world leaders. But somehow the nervous 16-year-old girl sitting across from him felt far more important than any boardroom conversation. Because in all his years of success, he had rarely seen kindness this pure. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Lena, she said gently, we travel around the country sometimes without telling anyone who we are. Daniel nodded. We visit towns, restaurants, neighborhoods just to observe people. Lena frowned. Observe people? Yes, Daniel said. It reminds us what the world is really like outside of corporate offices and private meetings. Carla behind the counter was now listening openly. The truck driver had turned completely around on his stool. Even the young couple had stopped their conversation. The entire diner had become silent. Daniel continued. Most people ignore us. He smiled faintly. Some are polite. Eleanor added softly. But very few people do what you did tonight. Lena looked down at the empty soup bowl. It wasn't a big deal. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You gave away your last $4. Lena shrugged. You looked like you needed it. That answer made Eleanor's eyes glisten again. But Daniel's expression became more thoughtful. He leaned forward slightly. Lena, can I ask you something? Sure. If you had known we were billionaires. Yeah. Would you still have paid for our dinner? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the diner waited for her answer. Lena thought about it for only a second. Then she shook her head. No. Daniel blinked. The security guards exchanged curious looks. Even Eleanor looked surprised. Lena quickly added, because if I knew you were billionaires, I would have bought dinner for someone else instead. For a moment, the diner was completely silent. Then Carlo whispered under her breath, oh my goodness. Daniel leaned back slowly in his seat, and something in his eyes changed. Respect. Real respect. Because that answer told him everything he needed to know about Lena Carter. Eleanor smiled warmly. Daniel, she said softly, I think we've found her. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, I think we have. Lena looked confused again. Found who? Daniel folded his hands together. Lena, Eleanor and I started a foundation several years ago. What kind of foundation? A program that helps young people who have faced difficult circumstances. Eleanor continued gently. We search for people with strong character, kindness, resilience. Daniel added, people who deserve opportunities but haven't been given them yet. Lena listened quietly, still unsure where the conversation was going. Then Daniel said something that made her heart skip. Every year, we select one student for a full life scholarship. Lena frowned slightly. What's a life scholarship? Carla leaned closer from the counter. Daniel explained calmly. It means we cover everything. Everything. School tuition, college, living expenses, mentorship, career training. Eleanor smiled. Whatever that student needs to build a future. Lena blinked slowly. That must cost a lot. Daniel chuckled. It does. Then he said the words that made Lena's heart pound. And tonight we believe that student might be you. Lena froze. Her mind went completely blank. Me? Eleanor nodded gently. Yes, dear. The truck driver muttered under his breath. Unbelievable. Lena shook her head quickly. No, you can't mean that. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because you just met me. Eleanor smiled kindly. Sometimes a single moment tells you more about a person than years of observation. Daniel nodded. You showed compassion when you had every reason not to. Lena felt overwhelmed. But I'm just a girl from a shelter. Daniel's voice became firm. No. He pointed gently toward her. You're a girl who gave away her last meal to help strangers. That tells me everything I need to know. Lena felt tears building in her eyes. She tried to blink them away. But why me? Daniel answered quietly. Because kindness like yours changes the world. Eleanor squeezed her hand again. And people like you deserve the chance to build a future. Lena looked around the diner. Everyone was staring. The truck driver. The couple. Carla wiping tears from her eyes. Even the security guards looked moved. Daniel leaned forward one more time. Lena, this doesn't mean your life changes overnight. But it does mean something important. What? Daniel smiled. You won't have to fight alone anymore. Lena felt tears finally roll down her cheeks. For the first time in months. The future didn't feel so frightening. But just as the moment settled over the room, Daniel's phone suddenly buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed instantly. Serious. Concerned. Eleanor noticed. What is it? Daniel stood up slowly. It's the board. One of the security guards stepped closer. Sir. Daniel sighed. It seems not everyone agrees with the decisions I make. Lena looked confused again. What do you mean? Daniel looked back at her. Let's just say some very powerful people might not like what I'm about to do for you. The diner grew quiet again. Because suddenly, this story wasn't just about kindness anymore. There were powerful forces behind the scenes. People with money, influence, control. And the moment they heard about Daniel Hayes offering a life-changing opportunity to a homeless girl, things were about to become very complicated. But what happened next would prove that Lena's small act of kindness had set something far bigger in motion, something that no one could stop now. And the next decision Daniel Hayes made would shock the entire town. The diner had grown completely silent. Daniel Hayes stood beside the booth, staring down at his phone screen. The message from the board of directors was short, but the meaning behind it was clear. Several members of the company's executive board had just learned that Daniel was considering funding a full life scholarship for someone he had met only minutes ago, and they weren't happy about it. One message stood out. This is not how a billion-dollar foundation should make decisions. Daniel slowly slipped the phone back into his pocket. Eleanor studied his expression. Trouble. Daniel sighed. Just the board worrying about money. Lena shifted nervously in her seat. You don't have to do this, she said quickly. Really, I didn't help you for anything in return. Daniel smiled gently. I know. That's exactly why this matters. Carla leaned against the counter, watching the moment unfold. Even the truck driver at the bar whispered quietly. Kid deserves it. Daniel turned back toward Lena. Tell me something, he said. What? If you could change one thing about your life right now, what would it be? Lena didn't hesitate. I'd want to go to college. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What would you study? Lena wiped her eyes and gave a small, shy smile. Social work. Eleanor looked surprised. Social work? Lena nodded. I want to help kids who end up in shelters like me. The words hit the room with quiet power. Because Lena wasn't dreaming about wealth, or fame, or luxury. She was dreaming about helping others. Daniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back at him. And both of them knew the same thing at the exact same moment. Daniel turned toward the security guard. Call my assistant. The guard nodded and stepped aside, speaking quietly into his phone. Within seconds, Daniel's assistant picked up. Daniel spoke calmly. Cancel tomorrow's board meeting. There was a pause on the line. Sir, I'll explain later. Another pause. Yes, Mr. Hayes. Daniel ended the call. Then he turned back toward Lena. Well, he said with a small smile. That settles it. Lena blinked. Settles what? Daniel leaned against the booth. Tomorrow morning, we're setting up a trust fund in your name. Lena froze. "Eh, what?" "A trust fund," Eleanor explained gently. "It will cover your housing, education, and living expenses." Daniel added, "From now until the day you graduate college." The entire diner reacted at once. Carla gasped. The young couple stared in disbelief. The truck driver shook his head slowly. "Unreal." Lena looked overwhelmed. "But that must cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." Daniel shrugged. "Probably. You're just going to do that because I bought you dinner?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He pointed gently toward her. "I'm doing it because you proved something tonight." "What?" "That character matters more than circumstances." Eleanor smiled warmly. "You reminded us of something very important." Lena's voice trembled. "What?" "That the world still has good people in it." Lena covered her face for a moment, trying to hold back tears. For months, she had felt invisible, forgotten, like the world had moved on without her. And now, because of a single decision made from the heart, everything was changing. But what happened next made the moment even more powerful. Daniel looked around the diner. Then he stood up and raised his voice slightly. "Excuse me, everyone." All eyes turned toward him. "I know tonight has been unusual." A few people chuckled softly. Daniel continued. "This young woman paid for our dinner tonight when she believed we were struggling." He gestured toward Lena. "She gave away the last money she had." The room grew quiet again. Daniel's voice became firm. "And I believe kindness like that deserves recognition." He turned to Carla. "How long has this diner been here?" Carla blinked. "Since 1958. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Well?" He smiled slightly. "I think tonight deserves a celebration." Carla frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Daniel reached for his wallet. "No one in this diner pays for their meal tonight." The room exploded with surprised laughter and cheers. The truck driver lifted his coffee mug. "Now that's what I'm talking about." Carla wiped her eyes, smiling. "You really don't have to do that." Daniel grinned. "Oh, I insist." But Lena tugged gently on Eleanor's sleeve. "This feels like too much." Eleanor shook her head kindly. "No, dear." She squeezed Lena's hand. "This is just the beginning." The next morning, something incredible began spreading across the small town. At first, it was just a few people talking. The truck driver told someone at a gas station. Carla told the morning shift at the diner. The young couple posted about it online. And within hours, the entire town was buzzing with the same unbelievable story. A homeless girl bought dinner for two strangers. Those strangers turned out to be billionaires, and they decided to change her life. Local news stations picked up the story by noon. By evening, it had spread across social media. Millions of people were sharing it, commenting, talking about it. But inside the Hayes Foundation office, Daniel Hayes sat quietly at a large conference table. Several board members appeared on a video call screen. One of them spoke firmly. "Daniel, with all respect, making emotional financial decisions sets a dangerous precedent." Another added, "What happens when thousands of people ask for the same thing?" Daniel listened patiently. Then he leaned forward. "You're right." The board members looked surprised. "You're absolutely right," Daniel continued. "If we only help one person, that would be a problem." The room went quiet. Daniel smiled slightly. "That's why we're not helping just one." Several board members frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel turned his laptop toward them. Displayed on the screen was a new proposal. The Lena Initiative, a nationwide scholarship program for teenagers living in shelters. Daniel spoke calmly. "This program will fund education, housing, and mentorship for students who show exceptional character and compassion." One board member blinked. "How many students are we talking about?" Daniel answered simply, "As many as we can." Another board member asked carefully, "And what inspired this program?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "A girl who spent her last $4 on kindness." Across town, Lena sat in the small office of the community shelter director. She was still trying to process everything. The director smiled warmly. "You know the news trucks are outside, right?" Lena looked nervous. "Yeah. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to." Lena thought for a moment. Then she said something that made the director smile even wider. "I'll talk to them, but only if I can say something important." A few minutes later, Lena stood outside the shelter, facing cameras and microphones. Reporters asked questions. "How does it feel to have your life changed overnight? What do you think about the scholarship? Did you ever imagine something like this would happen?" Lena took a deep breath. Then she answered, "I didn't do anything special." The reporters exchanged puzzled looks. Lena continued, "My mom used to tell me something." "What was that?" Lena smiled softly. "Kindness costs nothing." She looked toward the shelter building behind her. But sometimes, her voice trembled slightly. It can change everything. The story continued spreading across the country. People donated to shelters. Communities started kindness programs. And the Lena Initiative launched 6 months later. Its first class supported 100 students across the United States. And every year, that number grew. But the most important moment came nearly 8 years later. Inside a university auditorium, a young woman stepped up to a podium to receive her degree. The announcer spoke proudly, graduating with honors in social work. Lena Carter. The crowd erupted into applause. In the front row, Daniel and Eleanor Hayes stood proudly. Lena looked at them, smiled, and in that moment, she realized something her mother had known all along. Kindness doesn't just change moments. It changes lives. Sometimes, even the entire world. And it all started with $4.73.